I'm Lucy.
And I'm Jennifer.
You're listening to Everything I Know About.
Each week, we share everything we know about a new topic, equipped with some internet research and a little too much exposure to pop culture.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Today, we have a bit of a different episode for you guys, and we actually also have a bunch of new listeners. So welcome to everybody who's new to the pod. We had like another little TikTok clip go viral. This one I was really not expecting to do so well because it was about 2 episodes ago when we did the mafia economies about sand and olive oil. And this was a clip about sand that actually a lot of people were really interested in. I mean, I certainly found a lot of those facts to be super interesting and was super excited to share them.
Yeah, the genesis of that episode was even, I had heard in passing something about the sand mafia, and I was like, what is this? We need to do some investigative work. And we had put it in the backlog of topics. And every time we would look at it, we'd be like, wait, what is this topic that I put in here? Like, what is this again? And then so we finally did it. And happy coincidence that it went viral.
Yeah. It was also so fun to record that one.
Yeah. Well, what was funny about that is given the context that we had this topic backlogged for so long and we didn't know what it was. And then Lucy did the research and it was actually really interesting. Like you were so excited to share the information that you were like giddy. You were like smiling. You're like, yeah, the sand mafia, it's crazy. This is all the facts about it. And then in the clip, everyone was like, why is she smiling telling us about the destruction of the environment? Because she's excited to share her info.
My God.
That is why we look so smiley. And so we're not smiling over the fact.
Yeah, because obviously who would be excited over the destruction of the environment? That's so...
No.
I mean, the internet is its own beast, but I'm honestly smiley all the time. So yeah, I mean, I actually had issues with that growing up because I don't know where I like learned this behavior to just always be smiley. I do think women are socialized that way, so maybe it was a part of that. But yeah, especially like in high school when you're still like pretty awkward and you don't know how to have real conversations with the opposite gender. A lot of people would think that I was really into them or I really liked them romantically because whenever I would talk to them, I would be smiling and they'd be like, oh, she thinks I'm really engaging. Little do they know, that's just my face.
Perpetually flirty.
Yeah, my nickname was, okay, this is embarrassing. We'll decide if we keep this, but my nickname amongst my friends was Seducey Lucy because the smiling, which I guess some interpreted as flirting.
You should definitely keep that in. Amazing.
Yeah, no longer that girl. Although apparently I am, according to the internet.
Yeah, the internet fell in love with Lucy, of course. Seducey Lucy strikes again.
Well, anyways, welcome to all our new listeners. So happy that however you found the podcast, that you're here now. And normally we do release episodes weekly, but for July and August, we're actually on an every other week schedule because doing the podcast, it's really important to Jennifer and I. It's like an amazing project, but it is not our main job. We do not make any money doing this. We actually are launching a startup in the book space, and right now it's kind of crunch time because we are in the home stretch of getting ready for launch, and we will be sharing more about that project soon, so stay tuned. Today we actually have a bit of a different episode. It is our first episode where we're actually interviewing a guest.
Yeah, our first guest on the pod.
Our first guest. And we're like 28, 29 episodes in. So
yeah,
taken a long time to get to here. I feel like when we first had the idea for this podcast, we thought we would have guests all the time. But then it somehow never came to fruition.
You know what? I like it being us too.
Yeah.
But this will be fun to have a little guest every once in a while. We're not going to turn into like the Rogan podcast, just a guest every time. No.
We thought we would have some episodes where we'd feature guests, and then Jennifer and I just had too much fun talking to each other, so we never really followed up on that. But as our listener base has grown, more and more people have started reaching out to us, and this was one of those happy coincidences where the guest that we have today, her name is Christina S. Wilcox. She is not here in the room as we're recording yet, but she will be joining us in a matter of minutes. Some context on her, she is an author. She wrote a book about the Enneagram, which we obviously covered back in February with our personality tests episode. And it turns out that Christina had actually listened to that episode and wanted to come on the pod. So we thought it would be a great opportunity to do a follow-up to that episode. If anybody did listen to that episode, you might remember that Jennifer and I were both pretty skeptical of the Enneagram personality test. We ended up taking 3 different tests for that episode. We did the MBTI, the Myers-Briggs, the Enneagram test, and then the Big Five. And I think we were both a little bit of side-eye when it came to the Enneagram one.
Yeah, it was very confusing to understand. And I've actually taken it 4 times now. Like I took it twice for our initial episode. I took it once last night in preparation and then again this morning, and I've gotten different answers every
Really?
time. Yeah, I did it with different websites online.
Mhm.
So each test, obviously the questions are different. So I don't know what the calculations are on the back end for that. But yeah, every time I've gotten something between 3 or 4 different types, but weighted
Okay.
very differently. So I'm going to be very curious to see, because clearly Christina has made almost an entire career out of the Enneagram. So I have a sneaking suspicion we're missing something, and hopefully she
Yeah.
can shed some light on this.
Yeah. I revisited that first episode as well, and I retook the test today. I got the same thing, though.
Oh, you did?
I got the same thing as the first time. I've only taken it twice, but yeah, I'm super excited to hear what she has to say. And I will say, like, in digging a bit into her background as we, wanted to prepare and do our due diligence for this episode, she actually seems so fascinating in so many other regards, too. I found her podcast. It's just her solo hosting, which I so admire because that's really hard. I would never be able to do this podcast alone.
No, I wouldn't be doing this if it was
No,
without
100%
you.
not.
Not
Yeah.
happening. What's the podcast name?
It's called Genuinely Care About You. And I unfortunately had not been able to listen to the whole thing. I only listened to episode 1, which was her intro episode. But she was so sweet on it. Like, she talked a lot about how she, has been given the feedback that she, like, cares too much sometimes, and how she actually thinks it's a good thing and is,
Yeah.
reframing it. She has a particular interest in mental health, and it sounds like she has some experience with overcoming religious trauma as well. She identifies as a Christian. And so on the podcast, she defined it as a mental health podcast. I'm so curious to hear her experience because obviously we can relate to starting a podcast
Yes, we can.
and being on the internet and everything that comes with that. And her journey started in 2019. So for her, she's years ahead of us. She's got 5 years of experience on the internet, being a public presence
2
now.
books,
And 2 books, yeah.
which is wild. She has a very interesting story. I'm so excited to chat with her. And then we'll see if our opinion on the Enneagram changes. I have a feeling I'm going to be so bought into it. My woo-woo side is going to be
Oh, yeah.
yes, confirmed.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Jennifer recently introduced me to CoStar, which I guess I've been living under a rock because I did not know what that was.
And if you don't know what it is, it's the astrology app. It's powered by AI, but like you add your friends on there and then you see these funny little quips about your friends. I'm sure most people know what it is, hopefully.
Or I'm the normal one and everyone's like, yeah, I don't know what that is. And you're the crazy one.
We'll see.
We'll see. People should let us know who is right.
But it's fun. It's
It is
so fun to
fun.
look at.
I know. I feel like you're rubbing off on me because I signed up for the app. I'm used to horoscopes for myself. Like, I remember Googling
Yeah.
those when I was in high school, but these are like somehow they like generated between both of you. And ours have been scary accurate.
They have been.
Some of them have been so funny. And like, to be honest, I'm not like checking it regularly, but Jennifer will check it and she'll send me screenshots of what she finds. And like, here's one about internet stalking habits. And it says, Jennifer internet stalks via Goodreads.
So accurate.
So accurate. I was like, what the hell? Of course. And then Lucy internet stalks in an incognito tab, which hilarious. So
Definitely.
accurate. I'm not trying to get caught,
We often get ones, I would probably say over 50% of the time, they're like, you and Lucy work really well together. You and Lucy would make good business partners. I'm like, yeah, we do.
Somehow they know. Maybe our phones are listening to us. And
Maybe they
that's how
are.
they know.
Today says to Lucy, spring cleaning means cutting off friends with bad vibes. To you, spring cleaning means getting sidetracked reading your old diaries. Fucking fact. The amount
That
of
is
times
so insane. Yeah.
I have them sitting next to my bed, and when I am sidetracked, like or insomniatic at night, those diaries are getting whipped out and I'm reading through them. That is absolutely happening.
That is so funny.
We were just talking about you cutting off people with bad vibes
I
the
know.
other day.
I know. Literally, as I was taking the Enneagram quiz today in preparation for this episode, they asked this question that was like, do you believe that you should shed friends if they're not adding value to your life? And I was like, absolutely agree.
Yeah, that's your MO for sure. Hold on, I want to see what our compatibility says today. Okay, Jen Doback, your instinct is to take care of your needs, and Lucy likes to be systematic. Fact. They need to believe that you're a container whose only purpose is to hold their volume. Experiment with each other's
What?
worst habits.
Oh my God. You're a container to hold volume. Damn, that's dark.
I'll hold you.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is clearly us demonstrating the Barnum effect, which we talked about in that first personality episode.
Okay, you're going to have to remind me.
Well, you did the research on that, actually.
My brain is too full holding your volume.
Right.
My container is overfloweth.
Oh my gosh. The Barnum effect was that finding, because one of the questions we had going into that personality test episode was, why are humans so obsessed with categorizing ourselves? And why does it feel so delicious and fun? Us included, like we clearly are enjoying it. There's actually this effect that talks about this phenomena where people are very prone to taking generalized statements and thinking that it's about their unique personalities and their unique situation. This is what happens with horoscopes, where people tend to read into them and say like, oh yeah, of course, that's so me, or like, that just happened in my life yesterday. When the reality is they're actually very generic statements that would apply to most people.
Yeah, this is like the fortune teller effect.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly. But yeah, it looks like Christina is about to join us shortly, so we will be back with her and kick off the interview.
See you in a few.
Hello, everyone.
We're back with our guest.
We're back with Christina. So now that she's here, I'm going to briefly introduce her, but give her the floor in terms of sharing her own background as well. Christina, I did a little bit of internet stalking on you.
Lucy's research skills are unmatched too, so we might uncover some things you would not expect her to have uncovered.
Sounds good.
Okay, so Christina S. Wilcox. She is a 26-year-old author, mental health advocate, Enneagram expert, and creative. She runs an extremely popular Instagram account focused on the Enneagram and published her first book in 2020 called Take Care of Your Type, an Enneagram Guide to Self-Care. And she has a new book coming out at the end of this month in July called Take Care of Your Friends, an Enneagram Guide to Interpersonal Relationships. Okay, so that's the standard. I'm sure that's like from your website. So,
Yeah.
you know, you're like, that's been there, heard that. Okay, so notable things about you that I've dug up. Okay, one, you actually started your Instagram account February 2019, and you got to 30K followers in 2 months and 90K followers in the first year. That is crazy growth.
Yes, it was a whirlwind of 2 months. And it's just funny because I still work a 9 to 5 and stuff in marketing. And I've had people be like, what was your secret? Like, what did you figure out? And I was like, guys, no clue. Absolutely no clue what happened. So it definitely took me by surprise as much as it took everyone in my life by surprise. I really started posting about the Enneagram for fun because I was really interested in it in my real life with my friends. And I was also in a job at the time that was really horrible for my mental health. So it became my one creative outlet. And yeah, within 8 weeks, it just exploded. So it was crazy.
That's incredible. Yeah, especially on Instagram. It's such a tough platform to grow.
Yeah. I mean, now it feels nearly impossible to grow on Instagram. So I feel like in 2019, it was weird. There was like a really big wave of Enneagram and Myers-Briggs content that exploded during that time, probably because everyone was about to be stuck in their house and they wanted to learn about themselves. So I don't know. It's still a little bit of a mystery to me, but I'm thankful for it, obviously.
Yeah, I'm glad we're having this conversation and I was able to start following your account because I realized I had quite a few friends already following you.
No way.
Yeah,
oh my gosh.
yes.
That is crazy to me still. Wow.
So
That's so cool.
definitely piquing lots of people's interest.
Trying to.
Okay, the second fact I've got is that you actually had a podcast of your own in 2023. Are you still making it? Are you on hiatus?
Yeah, I am on hiatus and I'm trying to restart it. Basically, I finally bit the bullet and started the podcast as something I'd wanted to do for a really long time. And within 2 months of starting it, the office in which I recorded the podcast was in our basement, and our basement flooded.
Oh no.
And it has been over a year of renovations in that space since. We're hopefully nearing the end. It's been such a pain, but because of that, we've had so much work in the house that recording a podcast just took the back seat. And at that point, too, I had just gone under contract officially for the second book. So then I was just in writing mode. But yeah, I do hope to resurrect it this year.
Amazing.
Then maybe you guys can come on it.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I would be honored.
We're like podcast sisters.
Love.
You self-identify the podcast as a mental health podcast. So curious to hear more about that. definitely in our conversation, Jennifer and I are personally very curious about the Enneagram because we've taken the test, and obviously we did a whole episode on personality tests that you listened to, but would also love to hear more about mental health in general. And also, honestly, even like your experience with book publishing. A lot of our listeners are readers, and I think a lot of them probably also have ambitions to be writers.
Yeah.
So yeah, this will be a really good conversation.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about all of it.
That's kind of the intro I had, but is there anything that you want to share with our audience just so that they can really appreciate the perspective that you're coming from?
Yeah, I guess the more informal introduction to who I am is that I am just a girl who in 2019, for some reason, me posting about the Enneagram just, I always say it went nichely viral because I didn't go like viral, but within like the mental health and pop psychology community, I went viral. But I basically started, like I said, posting about the Enneagram as a creative outlet, but also because I loved how much it was helping my real life relationships and friendships. And it's just something I became super passionate about. I also always joke that that's when like the ADHD hyperfixation truly happened. And so it's just so funny to like low-key have a career off of a hyperfixation that I had. And since my page started picking up, it also was when I had just gotten married. I got married very young and was really discovering who I was for the first time. I moved out of my house. My husband and I moved across the country. It was a time where I was learning a lot about myself. And so the Enneagram kind of naturally became even more of something I was interested in. But also, as I honestly got diagnosed with some mental health things that I'd been struggling with my whole life, but never had gotten the label for it, my content and what I wanted to talk about in terms of the Enneagram was really the aspects of self-care and relationships that are not always easy, but worth it in the long run. Because with my own experience, looking inward and sitting in my emotions just in general is very difficult for me. And I feel like the Enneagram is such a cool and unique tool for people to kind of have an introduction to the language of doing that. Mm-hmm. That's at least what it was for me. It felt like the first step before I honestly saw a therapist. But it just revealed so much to me about myself and my relationships. It's why I became so hyperfixated on it. And I also saw, even between my friends, like different conflicts be resolved because the two people were finally able to see the other person's perspective. And I just loved that so much and wanted to post about it in a fun way. And I stumbled into the whole industry of it per se and tried to learn as much about it as possible. Once people started really looking to me for like expertise, I completed a training and really tried to become an expert in it. I'm still always learning, but I guess the whole point of that ramble is my ethos with the Enneagram is very person-centered, though the systematic aspects of it are low-key kind of ancient. Like it's a very old personality tool. It doesn't help you or your relationships if you're not focusing on actual people instead of just like definitions of this is how this type should look or whatever. I really believe in an adaptable Enneagram system. And so that's what all my content is focused around, along with mental health. And that's what both books are also about in their own way. So,
and for our audience who might not be as familiar with the Enneagram, like if you had to summarize what that is or how it works in a couple sentences, how would you do that?
I would describe the Enneagram as any other pop psychology tool that you're familiar with, but what makes it unique is the fact that it's based on your core desires and core fears, as well as childhood wounds. So the system was developed to be something very intimate with like a mentor. Specifically, it has a lot of monastic roots as well as traditional psychological roots with, I believe, Carl Jung is involved somehow. No one hold me to that though. But the way that I learned about the Enneagram was it was very much monastic in nature, and you wouldn't even like tell your type to anyone besides this mentor. Like it really was supposed to be a rigorous form of inspecting the self. Obviously now with the memification of it, it's very different. It's like, here's what dog you are based on your Enneagram type, which can be super fun. And I really try to balance both because, you know, who doesn't love a little laugh? Who doesn't love to know what dog they are? But I also really try to bring the more serious aspect of it too. Basically, unlike tools like the Myers-Briggs, where it's very external focused and very process focused, the Enneagram is very real. Like you're supposed to take the test and read the descriptions and the core fears and feel a little exposed and uncomfortable. What I love about it is also what is difficult about it is it's supposed to hurt a little bit for the purpose of having grace for yourself and hopefully validating some of your own emotions, but also seeing how you can grow. And that's something that I've always felt lacked in a lot of other pop psychology personality tests is it's just like, okay, here's how I am. But why do I do the things that I do? Why do I want to act this way, but I'm actually acting this way? And the Enneagram just gives such a language to that internal tension that it, to me, cultivates actual opportunities for positive changes in your behavior and also understanding others. Because with the Myers-Briggs, it's you can be like, oh, this person is a
ENTJ.
Yeah, ENTJ. Okay, ENTJ and INFP, right? Was that right? Did I remember that?
About us? Yeah.
Whoa. Oh my gosh. I can't believe I remembered that. I told you I listened. But instead of just being like, oh, this person is an INFP or ENTJ, say that you could be acting in a certain way that exemplifies the behavior of an Enneagram 3. But me saying, oh, that's so Enneagram 3 of you would be silly because I don't know your internal motivations. So it kind of rids this level of assumption that I really love and really fosters this space to be more empathetic to the people in your life of like, I see you acting this way, but I really don't know why you're acting this way. Humans are far more complex than, oh my gosh, I totally understand every desire and fear you have now that I know your Enneagram type. There's definitely so much complexity and nuance, but it just starts the conversation.
Yeah, I think personality abstractions like the Myers-Briggs or the Enneagram, they can come off to some people as so abstracted that they're meaningless. But I think what you said is really important, that it's a framework to start understanding people categorically. Like every person is so unique. You have to understand people on an individual level, but it's an excellent jumping off point to start digging into those like more nuanced pieces of somebody else and start understanding them. To that point too, Lucy and I both took the Enneagram quite a few times. Lucy had pretty consistent scores. I did not. I had different scores every time. And when we were trying to dig into what those scores meant for us, we had a really difficult time understanding the different types, what the wings meant. I even actually had a hard time finding tests online that were free and would give me in-depth information. So I'm curious if you'd give us tips on where to take the test, where to find out our types, and how to start digging in so we can get that meaning and that value that you find in it.
For sure. I do find it interesting that since the Enneagram became more monetizable in like the time frame that I even like went viral for it, there were a lot of free tests available at that time, and now there isn't. So it is very interesting that there is some level of people being like, ooh, I can gatekeep the information now. Or it's just on some really sketchy website where you're like, what even is this? This is so woo-woo and weird. But I definitely would recommend, even though the tests are a great way to get a understanding of what types you could be, I honestly would recommend either reading, for those who want to get really into it, Beatrice Chestnut's work is really helpful in a lot of who I base my own like beliefs about the Enneagram around. She has amazing books about it. But there's a website, even though the test you have to pay for, the website, the Enneagram Institute, you can read all of the type descriptions, the relationship pairings, like you can do all of it for free, just not taking the test. You're really going to figure out your type by the core desires and fears as opposed to what questions you answer on the test. And I always recommend the Enneagram Institute's descriptions because they're very in-depth, and most people I've talked to after reading through those descriptions have come to understand their type. But my main advice would be to be patient with yourself too, because I've always felt imposter syndrome with this, but even as I was posting about the Enneagram, it took me multiple years to actually nail down my type because I was a person in their young 20s figuring out who I was actively. I really tried to lean into the intimate process it was meant to be of allowing myself to really think about it, really unravel, peel back the layers of the onion that is me.
I mean, now that you are an expert, maybe you wouldn't call yourself one yet, but to us, you're definitely the expert here.
Mm-hmm.
How would you say it actually plays a role in your day-to-day life? Something happens to you, you're processing that event emotionally, and you're like, oh, because I'm a type blank, that is a lens in which I view that thing. Or like maybe when you're meeting somebody new, do you like ask them what their type is, or do you think about that at all?
There's like a big rule in the Enneagram community, which is so cringe to say out loud, but that you're not supposed to type other people because it is based on core desires and fears. But I do have my friends or like people that I meet, they're like, can you type me on the spot? And I was like, it's really not a party trick, but I obviously, if I'm 100% honest, I feel like I can tell pretty quickly just because, again, writing 2 books about it, I've intaked so much information and it's really just pattern recognition, you know, at some point. But I would say the way that it impacts my daily life. So there's multiple layers to the Enneagram, which I also appreciate since there are so many layers to people. But how the types are categorized is there's 3 sets of 3, the heart triad, the head triad or mind triad, and then the body/gut triad. Personally, my type falls into the mind triad, which is 3 types, 5, 6, and 7 are fear based. So whether they're actively avoiding fear, preparing for fear, whatever it is, I find myself honestly thinking about that pretty often and how I make decisions or how I don't make decisions. There's just small things that really impact me day to day as opposed to being like, that was so type 6 of me today. But it's more just acknowledging how much of my behavior is revolving around what I'm afraid of.
Yeah.
I find that that's more impactful, or with honestly my friendships with people I'm close to that are very different from me. The Enneagram is a useful tool to just remember like, okay, they're motivated by this where I'm motivated by this. So of course right now I'm not going to understand what they're doing because I would respond totally differently. So I feel like that's more of how I use it day to day or find myself thinking about it.
It almost sounds like skills you would learn in therapy or like couples therapy.
Yeah, I truly believe that. So many people I've talked to have gotten into therapy after getting into the Enneagram, which also as a mental health advocate, that makes me very happy because I just wholeheartedly believe in therapy, which I actually haven't listened to your episode today that you just posted about couples therapy. So I'm curious. I'm probably going to listen to it after this anyway. But yeah, I definitely think it does feel like very similar to a lot of therapeutic tools you would learn in a session.
The triad thing is really interesting. I wonder if the 3 types that I keep oscillating between in my tests are actually part of a triad. So I go between 3, 4, 5 quite often.
Okay.
Sometimes I'm told I'm like a 3 with a 2 wing, but that sounds maybe like it's part of a triad.
So 2, 3, and 4 are actually all a part of the heart triad.
Of course. I'm such a romantic.
And their behavior, their fears, their desires all revolve around grief/shame, which again, it's so just like hey, just met you. Are you ashamed of something?
And I am.
But yeah. Yeah, but it's just those three types. They are actively either avoiding their shame or grief, sitting in their shame or grief for too long. It's all just trying to cope with the feelings of shame that they have. The 5 is in the mind triad, which is more fear based. So, how the wings work while we're here is whatever your number is, your wing can only be the number that is directly left or right to it. So for a 4, you would either be a 4 wing 3 or 4 wing 5.
Got it.
Okay. What does the wing actually mean? How do you know if you're one or the other?
I think the wings personally are a lot more flexible than your type, because technically how the Enneagram works is you really are embodying all 9 types. You're just dominant in one. And the wings work, I always say it's like a bird who's flying and trying to change direction. If it's trying to go a certain way, it's going to lean into a certain wing more. I don't know a more profound way to say this, but just the salt and pepper to your personality. It's just some seasoning. It's not your overarching desire or fear. A lot of people say that they feel like they have balanced wings, or for some, it's super obvious what wing they are. But for me personally, I find that I lean into certain wings in certain levels of like stress.
Fascinating. I feel like I really misunderstood this test.
Oh my gosh. I feel like I didn't even take the test after talking to you. It's like completely different.
I'm more familiar with the MBTI because, as I mentioned in that first episode, I've been taking that since high school, and like even in a work context, that was like broadly introduced to everybody I worked with. And I feel like with the MBTI, it's like you get your result and then you just memorize the letters, and it's like pretty easy to remember what they stand for, and that's kind of it. And so when I took the Enneagram test, I just read the like summary basically of my type. And I was like, okay, do I agree with this or not? Right. And I didn't even spend time looking at the sections you mentioned around like, what are you afraid of? And like, how do you act when you're stressed and like those things. So definitely I'm going to go back and look.
What was your number?
I'm pretty consistently a 3.
Okay.
Is that surprising?
No, I think with the ENTJ energy, that definitely matches. So like, this is why it can become such a hyperfixation, is there is a rabbit hole of information to uncover about it. So not just the 3 triads are broken up into 3, but there's also stances that each number takes, and those are broken up into 3 categories that are different from the triads.
Is this like the self-sexual something else?
No, surprisingly, no. That's
something else?
Different. Yeah.
There's like, so many layers to this.
Yes, there truly is. And that's why it can become such an obsession for people, including myself. But the stances are separated by aggressive, dutiful, and withdrawn. And those are the way types approach the world. So 3s, 7s, and 8s are actually in the aggressive grouping. And all that means is like you live your life going towards people, towards opportunity, like just moving forward as a person. Where the dutiful types, 1, 6, and 2, feel a deep sense of obligation to the world and the people around them. So everything they do is tied to a person. I feel like 1s, 2s, and 6s move with people. Like they're not always the ones going first. And then 4s, 5s, and 9s are the withdrawing types. So as opposed to going towards something or moving with people, they're going inward and withdrawing often from the world or their relationships. And it's all just a way of approaching life and what is overwhelming about life. Whether you're going to be like, this overwhelms me, but I'm going to get it done anyway because that's just me, or I have a duty to this thing, or I'm going to actually peace out and avoid this. But yeah, there's so many layers. And I feel like these layers is what actually helps people find their type, because you may not know like an answer to a really ambiguous question that's on the test, but often you do know whether your first instinct is withdrawing, moving with, or moving towards something. And it's interesting too, because within this specific category of the Enneagram, It also means that 4, 5s, and 9s tend to be more past focused. So they tend to be very nostalgic, reminiscent.
Yeah, literally Jennifer was just talking about rereading her old diaries.
Really? Oh my gosh.
No, I'm sitting here with a smirk and a grin on my face because as you're talking, I'm like, oh, Lucy is really a 3. She's very go-getter, move forward, aggressive. And then I was like, I wonder what my type's gonna be. And then you're like, withdrawn, avoidant, nostalgic. I'm like, I am pegged right now. You've really typed me out very well.
It's so interesting because people do have a better sense of those qualities about themselves. So with the withdrawn types being more past focused, 1s, 2s, and 6s tend to be more present focused. Like it's hard for them to look back and look forward because they're just like, but there's so much happening now. That doesn't mean that they live in the present though. It just means that they're thinking about life in terms of today as opposed to what's next or what have I left behind. And then 3s, 7s, and 8s are future oriented. So they're very much would prefer not to think about the present or the past. They want to be thinking about what's next.
Mm-hmm.
What am I going to do? Where am I going to be? What's the end goal of this? What are we going to do after we accomplish that end goal, whether that be relational or vocational? So yeah, there's so many. I'm impressed that you even found this self-preservation, sexual or social. That's basically how you use your energy as your type. It just means when you're interacting with the world, do you prefer to preserve your energy, to use it in more like one-on-one intimate settings or communal, big picture, common good settings?
This is
It's
fascinating.
definitely, I know, it's definitely a little bit more, even as I'm saying it, I'm like, I know someone's going to say something in the comments of like, it's actually way more than that. And I agree. I just want people to know that I agree. It's really difficult to break down once you get into it, but that's why it's so much more robust than some of the other personality tests because it just feels like you uncover so much information about yourself. And that's why it creates so many paths forward because you can recognize, wait, I am past oriented or I am future oriented. Would it be beneficial for me to think about the future or the present or the past? Or, it just starts opening up, like you said earlier, Jennifer, a dialogue of yourself and your relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. This is making me think of a conversation I just had with my therapist, actually.
Really?
Yeah. Great intersection of mental health and Enneagram, just your niche. So you were saying that we each embody like a little bit of each type, right? But you're primarily one. And when I was talking to my therapist, he was talking about how we each have multiple people inside of us. And so this idea that you're only supposed to like hear one voice and that's your true voice. And so if it pops up, you feel like you have to listen to it. That actually causes anxiety because if it's not something that you want to hear, you push it down. That is me. That's what I do. And so to embrace the multitudes inside of you and say, I have multiple people, or like with this idea of the Enneagram, like I have multiple types, but I can like understand myself by understanding which type I am primarily. I think that's a really interesting framework to look at personality and self and like your inner dialogue and your inner world.
Yeah, I am a mental health counseling grad school dropout. So I do know a little bit about some therapeutic techniques as well. I do hope to reattend one day. But I think that similar to what your therapist was saying, there's a therapeutic approach that's rather new called IFS, which is Internal Family System.
Girl, that is my therapy. I'm an IFS. Yes.
Yes. Okay. So I think IFS and the Enneagram really do intersect so well. My therapist also uses IFS with me, so that's why.
It's superior. It really is.
It really is, though.
Yes.
It really is, because I love being able to think of myself as a whole person made up of many parts. I think the Enneagram can really help with that too, or be a good companion to therapeutic approaches like IFS for sure.
I feel like you just converted Jennifer. She's like 100% on board now.
Before we hopped on with you, I even said this. I was like, she's going to convert me to the Enneagram after this. Like my woo-woo ass is going to be all over this afterwards. I'm going to be researching.
It's so funny. Yes, we love.
Christina, I'm curious, as also Jennifer and I, being very new content creators, but like, since you've been doing the Enneagram content for like almost 5 years now,
Yeah.
Are you still passionate about it? Is there still more to discover? That is a long time to be doing one thing. Like, is that something you've struggled with at all?
Definitely. The way I get excited about the Enneagram now is when I kind of lift my head out of the Enneagram space and talk about it, even with people like you two who don't know much about it. And I can see how much it can be helpful when someone's understanding it for the first time. I think that's what excites me now is knowing that just because I'm sick of it, which oops, just because I'm sick of it, which again, like you said, it's impossible to not become sick of anything after 5 years, but not everyone is sick of it. And it's actually very much still impactful and helpful. And the reason I started posting about it, wanting to create things alongside it, is because of how it can impact people. And so I find that the second I start focusing on it, because it's like, oh, I have the manuscript deadline or I have to post something about it, the second it becomes that and not about people is when I lose patience for it. But the more I don't know, help or just yeah, it definitely is a privilege to have been given a platform for some reason. But the hard part is when you do go viral for a hyperfixation, because hyperfixations do fade.
Yeah.
Just the nature of hyperfixations, especially when you have ADHD. Like the second I'm not interested in something, it might as well be dead to me.
Yeah.
It is like pulling teeth out of my mouth to get me to focus on it, you know? So it's definitely a struggle, but these types of conversations is what reignites my passion for it every time.
Well, thank you for that very real answer. For me, even doing something longer than a year, I'm like, oh, is it time to stop now?
I know, yeah. It's hard.
Literally this podcast, we have like an annoyingly long podcast name because we literally were like, okay, if we just pick one niche or one topic, we're going to lose interest. So we have to like make it broad enough where we can literally talk about anything.
Yeah, that's why I also chose the genuinely care about you, because I could fill in genuinely care about with whatever I wanted.
I love that.
I learned my lesson even with my Instagram. Like, it's my name.
Right.
But people come to it for... I mean, I'm realizing now that people do stick around because they like me, which is so nice.
100%.
But it is hard to find that balance of they like me, but they're also here to learn and be educated about a topic I've been posting about for 5 years. So I definitely relate for sure.
I want to ask you about your book. The premise being helping you understand the people in your life and build your relationships based on the Enneagram, which I think is really cool, especially now that I have way more context on how we can actually use the Enneagram. But I want to go back to something you said earlier, which is we're not supposed to type people. And so when I get to read your book and start using it in my own life, how do I go about actually implementing the advice with the people in my life if I don't know their types? Like, do I have to get them to take the test? Can we infer based on what we know? Like, how can we use it?
Yeah, I definitely think for those you feel comfortable with, if they're open to reading about the types so that they can know for themselves, I definitely would encourage that, just because, especially when it's something like your romantic partner or your best friend or like your mom or someone that you actively want to be improving a relationship with, it is super helpful if they're open to it to know for sure. But I would say as you're reading it, you will be able to gather context clues. The experts in the Enneagram made that rule mostly so that people don't abuse it and just like write people off based on their type. But even if you can't get the person you want to take the test, I think it would be, as long as you're not like going up to them being like, I know you're such an Enneagram 7. The book I'm reading, it's so obvious. Like, as long as you're not approaching it like that, because no one wants to be talked to like that, you know? But if you're just wanting to learn about it yourself, you will be able to put context clues together of what types your friends are for sure.
And then last question, would be so curious to hear about what the writing process, the contract process, even like how they approached you with this book. For selfish reasons, like Jennifer and I both have ambitions to like be published authors one day, but so excited to hear about that.
Yeah, so this process for the book was different than my first one because My first book, I was lucky enough to be approached by a publisher, which doesn't happen. As we know, it is very difficult to get your work in front of a publisher, but I didn't approach anyone with a completed manuscript or even a book proposal, which is typically how you would approach it. Like with a literary agent, you'd been working on a book proposal, or you have like chapters. Sometimes you have the full manuscript, and that's what you're pitching. Where the first book was just, I got really lucky and was approached to be the author of a concept that they had for an Enneagram book. Obviously, they allowed me to like take it the direction I wanted, but they had the original title already in place, and they wanted to see like, hey, could you send us some things about what you would do with this if you were to author a book titled this? And it kind of snowballed from there. So the first process was very different to traditional how you would typically go about it. It also was right before the height of lockdown in 2020. So also the process of writing the book, PR for the book, everything was different than what I'm experiencing the second time around. But this process, I started developing this concept in late 2021. And I worked with my literary agent to develop a book proposal. And we went more of the traditional route this time and began pitching like a sequel type book to the first one. And the publisher I'm working with, Andrews McMeel, they're wonderful. They distribute through the same big five publisher, Simon & Schuster, that had approached me, but they're their own separate entity. They just distribute through them. This process has been, it feels like going through it for the first time, honestly, because the industry was actively adapting as I was learning the industry. Like, I feel like now I'm actually understanding how things work versus when everything was just up in the air for everyone, especially in terms of like manufacturing and deadlines and all the things. So it's definitely been a learning curve all over again. The writing process too was a lot harder for me this time around. And a huge part of that is because our basement flooded right as I started writing. And as you know, writing does require you being in an inspirational space of some sort. And this room used to be like filled with boxes and storage. And I would just be like sitting in here typing away. And the concept too, friendships are so fragile and like a huge part of life for people, or an area of life people wish that they had more developed. So I don't know, it took a lot more brain power this time around with wanting to write according to the traditional Enneagram system, but also wanting to be unique and applicable to the topic I was writing about. But yeah, this book kicked me a little bit to write it. I bled for this book a little bit.
Yeah. That's so real, though. I appreciate you, like, being honest and, like, giving us a peek behind the curtain.
Yeah, and for so many people, too, like, even if you're lucky enough to work with a publisher and get an advance that could sustain you for the year you're writing the book, that wasn't the case for me. I still had to work a job. I'm not a full-time author, even if that's the goal one day. And so I think a lot of people, even me, just had this perspective of like, I'm going to be able to write and just be an author and it'll be awesome. Writing a book, even if it's about the Enneagram, is so hard. I guess now I'm just speaking to anyone who's listening who wants to be an author. There's never going to be a perfect time to start or like a perfect environment where you feel the most inspired. What I've learned, it's in the moments where it is the hardest to write something on the page that matters the most. And it's really, any way you can keep writing is just the most important.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like definitely a labor of love. And I'm very impressed that you've completed now 2 books before the age of 30.
Yeah.
I'm almost 30, Lucy's 30. So you've got 2 books under your belt where we're still working on 1.
Well, I think honestly, like I've wanted to be an author since I have like diary entries from when I was 6 talking about being an author. But if I hadn't have been approached who knows what would have happened or when I would have finally done it. Like, I was expecting to not publish a book until very later in life. So it definitely wasn't even like a choice, even though obviously it's such a gift. But that's why you just gotta keep writing now, because you never know. There could be a publisher watching your podcast and be like, oh, they would write a great book. That happened to me, and I didn't think that would ever happen to me. So it's just like,
yeah, we'll put it out there into the universe right now.
Yes. Yes.
Any publishers, come at us.
Any publisher listening.
I think it's so fascinating because what you're speaking to with the book writing process, with really getting good at anything, is like how important it is to bring structure to it and like have habits.
Yeah.
Because we did the Artist's Way and we did an episode about that. And a lot of that process is about just doing it every single day, even if you don't feel good or you're not in the mood. And I think the fact that you have been running this content business for so long, like that takes so much discipline too. To be like posting on a regular cadence, I can see how that, not only from a content perspective, informed your writing, but I'm sure also just from like a life skills, learning to be disciplined, having to have structure on those things has also been able to like translate into making you a successful author.
That is so kind. I don't know if I would ever call myself disciplined. Definitely it's a struggle for me, but I appreciate that so much.
Well, thank you for sharing your process and your journey with us and all of this wonderful Enneagram insight that you've definitely converted me. I will be looking far more into the Enneagram, and I'm so looking forward to reading your book as well. Can you give us the release date?
Yeah, so it comes out on July 30th. It's available for pre-order anywhere books are sold. If you want to request it at your favorite local bookstore, that's also awesome. But I think it also comes out on like National Friendship Day, which is so cute.
Oh,
so,
amazing.
Yeah.
Was that on purpose?
It was on purpose from the publisher to think of that, which I'm so thankful they did, because when they told me, I was like, ah, and they're like, you didn't know? And I was like, no.
Amazing. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
And thanks to our audience for listening. If you enjoy the pod, we would love for you to give us a follow and rate us on Apple Podcasts, which helps us get the word out and reach new listeners. Full transcripts and show notes are available on Patreon, where if you choose to become a patron, you'll also get access to bonus content, our monthly book club, and our eternal gratitude.
If you'd like to get in touch or suggest a topic for a future episode, email us at everythingiknowaboutpod@gmail.com or DM us across all socials at EikaPod, that's EIKA pod. Thanks for listening and see you next week.